Please welcome with me Thom Powell.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Before we begin, I'm trying to get used to these two screens. I've never done this before. Anyway, first of all, let's thank our sponsors, Dave and Angie. Good to have somebody who's willing to do this. I would never put on one of these conferences. I don't know how they managed to pull it off. But Joe and Tammy as well. So we spent the evening up there last night, and that was wonderful. And they gave us a great dinner. And thank you, Tammy, before you run away. I enjoyed Dave's talk. I've seen it before. It always freaks me out a little bit. Last time I saw Dave speak, I was so freaked out. I took my hiking boots back to REI and said, I'm never going again. And I was standing in line behind another guy who had a pair of hiking boots, and I said, you didn't see? And he said, yes, I did. One thing you will never see in REI is one of Dave's books. But when it comes to this missing person thing, there's this trail in Oregon called Eagle Creek Trail, and it's one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful trail in the state. Multi waterfalls, super majestic. It's also super crowded. I mean, you're actually walking in a line most of the time. Why couldn't we arrange for some missing people there? There was one kid who took fireworks in there with him and threw fireworks into the ravine, started a forest fire, and burnt the entire place up. Now, I don't know. I would make that kid missing if I had the opportunity to do it. Yeah. So, I don't know. I feel badly for people for whom they know someone who has that tragedy befall them, but I do find myself getting a little hard-hearted in Oregon, where we have so many hikers, and whatever. I'm one of them. I can't complain. Anyway, a lot of people don't like people taking pictures. I don't have any problem with it. I don't think every single slide is worth taking pictures of, but there's a couple slides that might be worth it. I really don't mind. As you know, they don't want you to ask questions, so that's fine. I don't have time probably anyway. I have books over there. You might have seen me. I was wearing an English driving cap. I do that because my bald head gets really cold a lot of times. But it's not cold now. I'm sweating bullets. You try getting up in front of 400 people sometime. Anyway, I'm back there in the corner, and a couple quick questions. How many tribal members, First Nation, how many of those are represented here today? Thank you for coming. It's I'll get to that anyway in a few minutes, but there is a significance whenever I see meet a person who said they've seen a Sasquatch more than once, which they used to say was always baloney. I've learned to ask them, are you tribal? And invariably they say yes. So there does seem to be some sort of connection between tribal ancestry and the Saskies finding favor with your persona. How about Montana residents? Do we have any of those here? All right, that's very gratifying. I lived in Montana in the mid-'70s, 2 years. But now I live in Portland, Oregon. And I know, thanks. I know, well, everybody needs somebody to look down on. I almost didn't make it here. You see, it's amazing to me how many people have no idea where Montana is. Okay, there's Glacier Park. The other day, I was reading in the newspaper about a person who had the ultimate tragedy of being attacked by a bear. And it happened, let's see if we can go back, try that again. On this, which is the North Fork Road on the edge of Glacier National Park, and it goes all the way up there. So if that's your screen over here, that's the North Fork Road. And it's very long. I don't think it's still, is it still unpaved? Okay, all the way up to Pole Bridge, right? So someone had a bear attack up there, and I was reading about this in Apple News, and they said that it happened on the Wyoming-Canada border. How's that for geographically challenged? So I'll bet you people didn't know we're standing here on the Wyoming-Canada border. It's kind of a big place. Well, it gets worse. We checked in, my wife and I, at the airport, and the attendant asked, "Where are you going today?" And I said, "We're going to Kalispell, Montana." And she said, "Okay, I'm going to need to see a passport." Well, my blood ran cold because I did not bring my passport, and I'm like, there's no way I can get home and still catch my flight. But I did have with me one of these, they give you these passport cards now, and they're good for a few places anyway, but it does say that you have a passport. I didn't have the little book, but I had this card, so I proudly pulled it out of my wallet, slapped it down on the counter, and go, "There." And she looks at it, and she says, "This is only good for Mexico and Canada." And I'm just like, "Well, you mean I need another passport to go to Montana?" This makes no sense. I'm not even leaving the country. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to go because I don't have my passport, and she's demanding it, and this isn't good enough. And I say, why do I? First of all, it's not the only demilitarized zone between Oregon and Montana is Idaho. And then she says, "Well, calm down." And meanwhile, I'm kind of like, Scott was saying with the Sasquatch, they do these emotion noises. Well, I'm standing there at the counter going, "Blah, blah, 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 blah." and she's saying, "Calm down." And I said, "All right, I'll calm down if you educate yourself." But little geography here. Anyway, finally, my wife was able to convince her that Montana is in the United States. I was at that point, I was incommunicatable. I was wondering whether she just didn't know where Kalispell, Montana was, or whether she maybe didn't understand. Maybe I didn't enunciate, and she thought I was saying Montenegro or somewhere. So I had an idea. I'm looking at Dave's poster here. And I'm saying, "Dave, save this poster. Next year we'll do the conference again. And then we will pronounce it differently, and it will be the Montanacon. Montanacon. And then you will all need passports to get here." So, welcome to Montanacon. Anyway, I guess I know I'm not a stand-up comedian, but I am an 8th grade science teacher, and I have learned that if you don't do some comedy, you're going to get barbecued up there. So I've learned to kind of keep things light and tease people a little bit. So people say that, maybe I'm crazy too, especially with the Bigfoot thing. I got that a lot. "Tom, you're crazy." And it's very comforting to be in a room with guys like Scott Nelson and stuff, because Ron and Scott are always teasing each other about how they're crazy. And if Scott is crazy, I'm not trying to point any fingers because I know I am. But if Scott is crazy, I figured out why. And that is because what he was doing up here, he was playing those calls not once but dozens of times. That guy sits there probably for months, maybe years, listening to over. That's why he's crazy. Now, if you were there at Joe and Tammy's place last night, he told an amazing story of misfortune as he was traveling with Ron Moorhead. And I don't know what the takeaway for you on that little story he told was, but the takeaway for me was, I am never going hiking with that guy. And I'm definitely not going to get on a horse with him anywhere nearby. It's not going to end well. So, anyway, he's a good friend. It's fun to tease him, and he'll tease me back. But let's start going on with some of this stuff here, lest you think I'm going to stand up here and tell jokes all day. But anyway, I wrote 3 books over the years. I got a 4th one that's at the publisher. It's not here today. But there they are, and I have at least one of them still up there on the table. And the first one that I wrote was The Locals, 2003. And at the time, there was a whole bunch of stuff about Sasquatch that was not widely accepted that probably is now. Number 1 is that it happens everywhere, not in the Pacific Northwest. Number 2, that there are places where people have been habituated to them, or the Sasquatch, or somebody's habituated to somebody, I'm not sure who. But anyway, those are ideas that in 2003 were pretty radical, not so much anymore. So the book might be a little bit outdated by today's standards. One of the other things I said, hey, these computers, man, they are like Bigfoot's worst enemy because we're using them to track them, make patterns, all this stuff. Bigfoot's going to get found out. Well, that's not a new idea anymore. So anyway, for that, I was really involved in BFRO for a long time, as Dave, I think, mentioned. And I was one of the guys who could put up with Matt Moneymaker's, shall we say, mercurial personality. And he would send me all of the sightings in the Northwest. And then I would delegate them out or investigate them myself. And during that time, I will say that I did find a whole bunch of things that are of interest to modern day researchers. For one, this self-luminous eyes that who was talking about that earlier today? The eyes that not just glow but can actually project light. I found a couple of witnesses, they found me, who described that. One was in Mississippi, and what he had done is left some things on a bench, and then he was hiding somewhere nearby, and he saw the creature come up and look, and it was pitch dark, there wasn't a moon, and what he saw was this light just come up from nothing and come from the eyes of the creature, and it illuminated the object that was on the bench, and it studied it for a while, and then the light dissolved away and the creature turned and left. So I did find some examples of this self-luminous eyes. In other words, that they can indeed project light. It's crazy, but I found examples of that during a time when there was no that wasn't really being discussed a lot. I did find examples of people who were talking about their electronics were being disabled. And Ron back there likes to say, if you haven't had electronics failures while you're doing Sasquatch stuff, you haven't been doing it very long. Because it's a very common occurrence, actually. Batteries going dead is the most typical one, but all kinds of stuff like that. I have run into that. One thing I did run into is accounts of people of a Sasquatch shaking the tree and all the apples coming down. And then the other ones come out of the woods and they gather them all up and spirit them away. I've seen that several times. Oddly enough, when I first bought my property in Clackamas County, my next door neighbor accused me of stealing all his apples. And only years later did I find out through an acquaintance, because she said, he told us that you were stealing his apples. And I said, why would I risk being shot over 20 cents worth of fruit? And she said, no, it wasn't a few apples. His whole tree disappeared over one night. And I was like, bing! And all of a sudden at that point I realized, hey, I must have Saskies in my immediate area, which was Clackamas County. I did not move there because of my interest in Sasquatch. As Jim said, I was interested in the rivers, but I did find that I apparently was surrounded by Sasquatch activity, and I came to find out Clackamas County, Oregon, has more sightings than any other county in Oregon. I'm not saying it's, there's places in Washington that get way more. But you do get that. I found examples of Sasquatch wearing clothing. And the spookiest one that I ever heard was at Mima Mounds, which is south of Olympia along I-5. And this gal, when her mom drove up to the natural area and were about to get out of the car, when they saw this very tall individual getting out of a car wearing the craziest set of clothing. It was wearing a hoodie T-shirt that was up and the string pulled around its face, and yet she could see a very hairy face. It was wearing gloves, work gloves, like you'd get at Home Depot with orange cuffs. It was wearing rubber boots and tights, and you could see the fur underneath the tights. And when she and her mom pulled up, they looked at this thing, and it looked back at them, and fire came out of its eyes, and she said it was the spookiest thing she'd ever seen in her life. They put that car in reverse and got the heck out of there, and that was the end of their trip to Mima Mounds. So I have seen that. I've also run into a witness who said they saw a Sasquatch wearing an Oakland Raiders T-shirt. Not Kansas City Chiefs, so take that, Scott. Anyway, let's see. The disappearing thing, I've run into that several times, and I had one guy who said, I saw that thing disappear right in front of me. He was standing in the middle of a clear cut, and it was like a Star Trek teleporter. He just went, and he was gone. And he said, I know that I've already been to Peter Byrne, and he says, I'm full of baloney, but he said, I just want to know one thing. Do other people report this? Because it's really bugging me. And I said, yes, I have seen other accounts of that. I have seen accounts of a set of legs walking across the road with no apparent torso attached. I've run into that a couple of times. As far as the bones and graves thing, I had a guy take me aside and said, I know where one is. And this was in Ohio. I was there on the occasion of my father's funeral, and he took me out in the woods and showed me this grave. Curiously, it was a place where I, as an Ohioan, used to camp as a kid. So sometimes you feel like you're being reeled back in on this stuff, Maybe they got your number at an early age. I do not know. But he showed me the grave, and he told me the story of it. And he, first of all, made me promise never touch this thing. And I said, no problem, Ron. That was his name, Ron Lewis. He said, we found this thing, and we decided we were going to be famous. We were going to find the Sasquatch bones, and so we started picking that thing apart. And shortly after we started, the stones were interlocked and very difficult to get apart. And he and his friend were working it pretty hard, and all of a sudden they were beset by an absolute horde of mosquitoes. So bad that they couldn't continue working. They didn't bring any bug dope with them, so they got the hell out of there. And they decided, we're coming back tomorrow with our DEET, and we're going to finish this job. And that night, both of them had the same, I don't know whether it was a dream or an apparition. Ron described it. It was in my bedroom. It came through the wall, and it was standing right in front of me, and it said, put my grave back. And at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, he called up his buddy, and he said, I think we got to put the grave back. And his buddy said, I know. He had the exact same, experience. They went and they put that grave back. They left flowers. They burned incense. By the way, there were no mosquitoes. And so it goes. By the way, if you ever found a grave and you thought it was a Bigfoot grave, it's just as likely that it's a Native American grave, and there is this thing called the Antiquities Act, and if you get caught, you are in so much trouble. So Bigfoot or no, you do not mess with any of that stuff because you just don't know what you're messing with. Not that anybody's likely to do this, but, spread the word. Leave it alone. But the big question, and my buddies, the flesh and blood, or as Dave calls them, the apers, all have the same, thing. Why aren't they finding the bones? And the answer is always because bones don't last well in the wilderness. You never find a bear bone. You never find I found a bear skull once, so that's not necessarily true. However, the truth is that I am firmly of the belief that they bury their dead. When a Sasquatch does die, and they live a long time, I'm given to understand, but when they do die, they don't leave their brethren face down in the dirt. Of course, they're going to carry them away and give them a fitting burial, etc. So I think, to me, that's a much more plausible explanation. And basically, what Dave and Scott and everybody, Ron, are saying, they're human. Well, do we just leave the bodies lying there? So no, I don't think they do either. And so I think there's a better explanation, but there it is. Well, anyway, back to the BFRO business. The real reason I was doing it was because I was a big photography buff, and I was given to understand that in Clackamas County these things happen, and I knew that there were places where it was probably even more of a happening, and I did learn through the BFRO database that the closer you get to Mount Rainier, the more shit goes on. And so I was watching the traffic, and I'm trying to find somebody who's having these repeat visitations, because at that time I was of the belief that if you put the cameras out there, this is going to be a slam dunk. I'm going to have pictures in a week. And so I did find this family who lived in the shadow of Mount Rainier, and they don't mind their name being spoken, Alan and April Hoyt. And they lived outside of the town of Onalaska, Washington, which is kind of near Morton, which is kind of near Mount Rainier. And they were telling me about their experiences. First of all, their daughter and the wife, April, had the most sightings, but they had repeat sightings, and mostly on horseback. So there's something about the horses in their case. Now, I know that Scott and Ron were saying they were shy about the horses, but the Hoyts were saying, oh no, the horses are disarming, and the horses seem to be, and not only are the horses not of a threat to the Sasquatch, but the horses also point with their ears when one's there. And so they were very aware of where the thing was, because the horse's ears would always tell them where it was. Well, if you know horses, you probably know there's something to that. Anyway, the Hoyts were losing a lot of livestock, and when I say livestock, I mean bunnies and chickens. And in the case of the bunnies, they would breed the bunnies, and they found that whoever was taking them could work the catches. They never took the breeders, but they did take the yearlings. So they seemed to understand if you leave the breeders alone, then you're going to get more later. They would find chicken feathers in neat little piles in the woods. I asked them, because I had heard about this in Oklahoma, people having their freezer raided. And so I asked them, do you have an outside freezer? And they said, yeah, we do. And I said, have you ever lost anything out of it? And they say, yes. I accused my kids. I come out and the freezer door's open, and I tell the kids, will you please close the damn freezer? And the kids would say, we didn't open the freezer. One day they came out there, and the side of a pig that was in the freezer was gone. The ice cream bars were still there. Now, what kid is going to take a pig and leave the ice cream bars? They use the pig for this bury the pig thing, do the Polynesian pig roast, and they lost the side of their pig. And so I said, oh, that's a thing. And that had not occurred to them before. So I knew that at that point we were in business. So I got my hands on some of these trail cams. This was the mid-'90s. They were crazy expensive back then, $600 each. And we put them on the freezer. And then I slept out, and they were a little bit surprised that I would want to sleep out. You know, I just slept out under a tarp. It was a rainy night, and they said, "You sure you want to do this?" And I go, yeah, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Besides, I got my camcorder in the sleeping bag. Oh, I thought I was smart. So I'm lying there, the rain's pouring down, all of a sudden I hear these footprints coming around me, and I pull out the camcorder and start to pan around. Everything stops. That was the end. That was the last of the activity that night. And if I was quick on the uptake, I would have realized that the camcorder was the reason that they begged off. To this day, when people tell me, you know, I know you're into the Bigfoot thing, but I'm here to tell you, I got kids, my wife is freaked out, we just want him to go away. What do you tell them? Put out a camera. It works every time. So there are people who don't like it, and there is a way to do it, and that is to just, anyway, so this is the idea, is the camera stops the activity, and it did for me personally, and it probably works for a lot of other people. That's the freezer, and we put a camera on the freezer, and I thought I was really clever because I hid it in a beehive, you know, one of these white boxes that you raise bees in. It totally stopped. All of a sudden, the activity shifted to another part of the property. There were so many footprints in this place in the woods, we called it the dance hall, because it looked like somebody was practicing a waltz or something. There were just footprints all over the place. So we moved the camera to the dance hall. Then the freezer starts getting hit again. It took me a while, I'm embarrassed to say, to really put it all together. But in the meantime, we did get more ambitious with our cameras. Oh, well, let's see, that's right. I got to point at the computer, not the screen. These are the cameras I installed. I thought I was pretty clever. You're free to laugh at that. I mean, how often do you have a birdhouse with indoor wiring, you know? But one is the illuminator. This one right there is an infrared illuminator, which I built from a kit. That's how long ago it was. And then the camera was in this box right there. And the daughter was having things disappear out her bedroom window. One day she comes home and her curtain rod was pulled down and her earrings were gone. So if you ever see a Sasquatch wearing earrings, I know where they came from. Nina wants her earrings back. With their permission, we put the camera outside Nina's window. Nothing inappropriate, just facing alongside of the building. And we left the camera there for a good while. I think for a grand total of 2 years, we had a camera on that site. And we got nothing. And then, about this time, Ray Crow, who Dave mentioned a few minutes ago, was in touch with this other guy who felt he had a mind link with these things. Rick Snyder was his name, and he was a Forest Service person, and he lived up in a remote Forest Service camp called Ripplebrook up on the top of the Clackamas Drainage. And he felt that they were coming up to his abode, this little cabin they gave him, and they were saying to him, "Come out." Well, Nina had that too. Nina at the Hoyt place said that they called to me. And I said, "What do they say?" They said, "Come out and play." And she would sit on the step and knock rocks together, and then you'd get the knocking back. And one time she said they woke me up in the middle of the night and said, "Get up and get out here." And she went into her parents' room and said, "What do you want?" And her parents said, "We didn't say anything." Well, then it became clear to me that there was this, what people call the mind speak. And Ricky Snyder was saying this. So all of a sudden, bing, I get this idea. Let's try this. So this other guy that Ray Crow introduced me to, Steve Fredericks, really felt that he had the mind speak going. So I didn't tell him too much, but I said, "Steve, I have this place where I got these cameras. And I want you to try to communicate with them and ask them to step in front of the camera. And then Steve said, well, it would help if I could drive around I need to be close to the area. It helps. And I said, Steve, I'm not going to tell you where the place is because that would contaminate the experiment. If anything happens, well, they're going to think it was you. I didn't tell the Hoyts I was doing this. And so I think in psychology circles, this is what you call single blind, when neither part of the research effort knows what the other guy is doing. So that you can't accuse that of being a self-fulfilling prophecy, also known as a Rosenthal effect. So Steve Frederick says, all right, I'll give it a try. I'll call you when I think I've made contact. All right, let me know. Steve calls me back about a week later. He said, first of all, they were really impressed that you asked. Because here us researcher guys think we're so damn clever, but we're going around. You never think to what if you just ask permission? And so he said, I did tender your request. And the Hoyts didn't know about this. And 48 hours later, the Hoyts called me up and said, we got something on the camera. And I'm like, oh, cool. I'll be right up. I drove up, it was 100 miles north of where I was living in Portland. And this is one of the camera images. So that, as you can see, it's a pretty shot over forest. I mean, completely clear cut. The reason the Hoyts wanted to get involved in the research effort is because of the logging in their area, which they wanted to see if they could try to stop. And they were worried about the Sasquatch's vulnerability with all this logging going on. Anyway, that's an area nearby, but not part of their property, but I just took that picture because it was pretty. There is what we got. There's a timestamp on the bottom of the picture. I'm not going to get too close to that speaker, but it happened on 12/30, 1999. And Alan calls me up on New Year's Eve and said, we got a picture. And I said, well, let me come out when I can. So I guess 12:30 was the night before New Year's Eve. There's the time, about 11:15. And what you have there, of course, is a shadow. And that's right outside Nina's window. And if it is a being, all you see is the upper torso, possibly. But I find myself wondering whether they're doing like shadow puppets, doing this with your fingers. It's almost like they're making a shadow. So you see, it's possible that even though they might have been aware of this request, they were not about to oblige. And so I didn't tell the Hoyts that I was using a sensitive, and I didn't tell Steve Fredericks that we even got anything. But I did tell Steve, I want you to try again. But this time, forget the cameras. No scientific-minded person's going to buy that kind of stuff anyway. I need a bone. I need something tangible. Steve said, ooh, they're not going to like that. And I said, just try it, Steve. And he did, and he called me back a week later, and he said, okay, I did what you asked. They did not seem too interested, but I did submit your request. And thank you, Steve. Within 48 hours, not knowing that I asked Steve to do all this, Alan Hoyt calls me up and said, we found a bone at the base of the camera tree. I said, I'll be right up, Alan. Drove 100 miles, and that's what he handed me. And as you see, it's kind of a saucer-shaped thing. It's very thick and very light. And I took it to a wildlife biologist guy, and he said, it's definitely a bird, but I don't know what kind. But that's a big old bone for a bird. It looked like, I swear to God, it looked like the top of a skull, except for that thickness and that definite bird matrix in there in between the top and bottom layers. So I had a neighbor who was raising emus. And I took it to him and showed it to him, and he pulled out a reference text. There was the skeleton of the entire emu on one of the pages, and there was a perfect match for an emu breastbone. I took it to Alan Hoyt, and I said, do you know anybody who has emus around here? And he said, my dad does. Where does he live? 5 miles away. How did an emu bone get from your dad's place And I said, what happens when the emus die? He throws them in a pit out back. Does he bury them? Not usually. They're pretty hard-hearted out there, you know. Anyway, what does it say? What is it saying to you? To me, it says they have a sense of humor. They're messing with me. There's no way they're going to give me one of their relatives' bones. If I asked you, would you dig up your relative? I need one of their bones, you know. Sure, Tom, you know, science, why not? No, they're not going to give you the goods. But they can jerk you around and have fun with you, and that's, to me, what it all says. Shortly thereafter, the Hoyts said, could we please stop doing this? And I said, well, I'm getting kind of burnt out on it too, Alan, but what's the problem? He says, our phones are tapped. And this is back in 2001 when we still had landlines and everything like that. And they said, we were having a problem with our phone, and we had that guy come out and check our line, and he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but your phone is tapped in 2 different places. Anyway, that's when Alan and I said, all right, enough is enough. We're done with this. But that summarizes my attempt to, get a piece of video of a Sasquatch, and all I can say is, don't waste your time. Then I wrote this book, which had to do with a sighting that happened in, Yakult, Washington, which is just a little bit north of Portland, and there's where it is, roughly, near Longview. And what happened in Longview is there was a bunch of people attending a Little League game. And this was investigated by one of Ray Crow's proteges, Larry Lund. During the Little League game in downtown Yakult, now Yakult is a one-light town, so downtown isn't that big. The Little League field is on the edge of a forested area in town, and during this Little League sort of a tournament they were having, 2 different times during the same day, a Sasquatch ran out. First it came out of left field, ran across the outfield, and went into the woods again in right field. All the parents sitting there were at first stunned and amazed, but then they decided, all right, somebody's jerking our chain. You know, someone's having fun with us. The second time it came out of left field and went back to right field, and that's when everybody was really wondering. Well, anyway, so that's the story, and I was so intrigued by this that I actually started, I created this story which has to do with a family that has a set of Sasquatches that are habituating to their presence, and so the story goes. Of course, the kids figure it out before the closed-minded adults, and then the kids inform the parents, and so forth and so on. But anyway, that was the story of Shady Neighbors. Now, meanwhile, London, Oregon, now we're up to 2012, and we find a trackway of over 100 tracks. We didn't find it. We were told it was there, and we went to investigate, and we cast as many as we could. Between the 3 of us, Cliff and Toby and I and a few other folks, we cast over 100 tracks. Some better than others. But it was just the strangest thing. They had run out onto this mud flat. That's a reservoir, and in the winter, they draw a lot of reservoirs down to make room for the rain. And so here's this mud flat, and the Sasquatch had apparently walked way out onto the mud flat, turned around, and walked back out, back into the woods. That's some of the tracks that we got, but we got a lot more. And we're looking for a pattern here. The third event is Chris Miniar, one of the BFRO operatives who lived near this town called Cheshire, down by Eugene, Oregon. And he was handed an event that happened to a gal who was driving from the Willamette Valley to the coast, and she stopped by the side of the road to relieve herself. No outhouse anywhere around, so she just had to go into the bushes. And right there on the edge of the pullout where she stopped was this futon. And on the futon were 2 perfect tracks of mud. So there they are. And I mean, you could even measure the stride if you wanted to. And so Chris Miniar was told this was around. He drove all over creation looking for this thing, couldn't find it. The directions were incomplete. He went back. He called the witness up, got more directions. He found out that he finally found the spot, and it was 1 mile from his house. Well, they cut out the pieces, and they're now in Cliffs Museum in Sandy, Oregon. But 2 really good tracks, which we playfully refer to as the Shroud of Cheshire. It's kind of a Catholic thing. Shroud of Turin, wasn't that what it was, Anyway, so I don't know what's going on here. The other one was the Skookum expedition, same thing. They skulked about for days, and I finally said, according to Alan and April, they know what you're doing, and maybe if you just try gestures of accommodation, you might get something more. And then the next day they put fruit out and everything. Lo and behold, a butt print and an elbow, and that's the Sasquatch. The Skookum expedition, as we called it, and there they are with the giant plaster cast of this this butt impression. So what does it all say? Clearly, they know that we're looking, and they're playing with us. And so I really think more than ever, there's validity. If you want something, ask for it. But this skulking about stuff is probably, at this point, not going to work. As far as the communication that was being talked about by Scott and others, putting food out is communication. When you take a girl out on a date, what do? You buy her dinner. That's communication. Hey, I'm interested in you. Gifting is what we call it in the Bigfoot biz, because baiting seems a little sort of insulting to their potential intelligence. Language, I won't even waste my time because Scott covered that pretty well. But we are finding that there is this nonverbal element, and some people have it and other people don't. I'm first to confess, I am thick. I do not, I'm not a sensitive person at all, but I know that there are these horse whisperers, and they are an extremely valuable resource if you are actually interested in opening up some lines of communication. So I do recommend that. I've tried it and had some very interesting results. And so I put all this kind of paranormal stuff together, and I put this book out in, I forget what, 2013 or something like that. And basically I attribute the Sasquatch phenomenon as one manifestation, as a whole rainbow of a constellation, if you will, of paranormal events, which are probably in some way related. And I speculate as to what that might be. Which brings us back to Glacier Park. Because after I had published Shady Neighbors, I was still working on Edges of Science. And I had my computer with me as I took my family to Glacier National Park. And this was in 2014. So it was right before I published Edges of Science. And I had Edges of Science on my computer. I was 2/3 done with the book. And stupidly, I brought the computer and the only copy of the book to date with me on the vacation. And we went to, whoops, sorry about that. Let's back it up. Leaned on that button too hard. Okay, I screwed it up. Anyway, Jim, it's up to you. So we went to Many Glacier, which is what I was going to show you if you don't know where that is, on the east side of the park, Blackfoot Reservation side by St. Mary's. Took the family there, and gorgeous hotel, but they make you park about a 1/4 mile away from the hotel because they don't want all those cars around the hotel. So I let the family go in there and go hang around the gorgeous lodge, and I said, I'll bring all the stuff into the hotel room. And I went and got my things, and one of the things was this computer case. But when I got all my stuff to the room, I couldn't find the computer case. And I was like freaked out. So I went back in the dark, looking all over the parking lot for the case. Might have dropped it. Maybe someone stole it. I don't know what happened to that case. But I even saw some people camped out in their car in the parking lot, and I could see the glow of a computer screen. So I went up to the car and looked in, and they were watching a movie. And I knew that this computer couldn't play movies, so I knew it wasn't my computer, but I knocked on their window and said, I'm really sorry to bother you, but I lost a computer around here. Have you seen any kind of suspicious activity or anything? They said, nope, just a Japanese tour bus. And, okay. I couldn't find the case. I didn't find the case. Next day I went out, looked some more, didn't find it, and I was beside myself, but I also knew I could screw up my family vacation here. So I'm just going to get over it. I went to the lodge management, and I said, I lost a computer. And I'm really worried about it because of what's on it, but I don't know what to do other than to report it. And she said, thank you very much. You seem very calm for having lost such a valuable item. And I said, well, I'm just trying to, I just decided, okay, I'm going to rewrite the book. That's all I can do. Nothing, you know. And we went around and hiked for 3 days. I lost it on a Tuesday night. We left Many Glacier on Thursday and then went to a nearby place, which was also owned by the park, and it was called the Goose Creek Motor Lodge or something like that. When I go to check in, they said, oh, by the way, Mr. Powell, you have a note here. Oh, interesting. I didn't know I was that important. She handed it to me and it said, call Many Glacier and asked for the manager. And I did that, and she said, I found your computer. And I said, oh, great, you have it? And she said, I don't have it. It's in Whitefish, Montana. And as you know, Many Glacier is almost 100 miles from Whitefish. You got to go all the way through St. Mary's, over the Going to the Sun Road, and all of this. And so she gave me the address of the guy. And as soon as we were done at the Goose Creek Motor Lodge, we drove over the Going to the Sun Highway, and we found the guy. He gave me his address, and it was on the, I think it's called KM Ranch Road, just south of Whitefish. You ever seen this place? Anyway, is that at KM Ranch? Okay. And so he was off of that road, and there was his little black pickup, and knocked on the door, and he explained the situation. He said, my job is I go around and refill cash machines. And I drive in my car, not a Brinks truck, because they want it to be low profile. They figure there's less problem with being robbed if they don't even know that you got cash in your car. So he said, I have a route that I go around, fill up all the machines, and one of them is Many Glacier. And on Thursday night at Many Glacier, I got in late. I refilled their cash machine. They let me park right in front of the hotel, and I went to sleep for a few hours, and then I got in my pickup truck. It was still dark, and I drove home. And when I got to Whitefish, there was this case in the back of my pickup truck. And I said, how do you explain that? And he said, I can't. But he said, if there hadn't been a checkbook in there, I wouldn't have known what to do with it. But I called and said, you know, this guy, Thom Powell, must have lost his case here. To this day, I cannot explain how, first of all, that computer case had to have been somewhere for 3 days. And then it was put into a truck that was not marked in any way. And then he drove home. We assumed that it was put into the truck while it was at Many Glacier, although we cannot rule out the possibility that it was put in his truck when he got home. How the computer got across the Going to the Sun Road, 50, 60 miles, I cannot explain. But he wouldn't take any money. I was incredibly relieved. But on the way into his driveway, he had a long dirt driveway, and just as my wife was turning the wheel to drive into his driveway, I said, stop! And I jumped out, and here was this huge pile of hawk feathers. No dead hawk, but a whole bunch of hawk feathers lying there at the foot of the driveway. I picked them up. Now, I know, having hawk feathers isn't as bad as eagle feathers, but it still is a federal offense. But I figured I'm a science teacher. I'm probably okay. But I did pick up a bunch of the feathers, and I cannot blame this on Bigfoot. But all I can say is paranormal AF. And So now this is sort of justifies my view of the paranormal now. And that is, I do understand that Sasquatch is part and parcel to this kind of activity, but there are a great deal of other things. And so now I'm working on this new book, and it's called Planet Strange. It's at the publisher now, but it's not out yet. And what I do is, well, if I tell you now, maybe I can save you ever having to buy this book. I mean, you paid to get in here. It got to be worth something. So one chapter is on the giants, as Dave was talking about. So I don't need to cover that. He did a great job. One chapter is on crop circles. That one is crazy, because I grew up thinking crop circles were totally bogus, that Dave Chorley and Doug Bauer were two guys who made them. Total BS. They did not make those. In fact, one of them actually had a deathbed confession. He said, we were put up to it. We were told or paid to take the fall for this. We never faked a crop circle. One of them did admit that. But the crop circles have crazy, crazy implications. And then the other one is the Mima Mounds. That one has me just scratching my head. And after that Sasquatch sighting, I decided to investigate Mima Mounds in detail. And I found that the controversy rages about these things, but there is no credible. The favored scientific view is that these mounds are made by gophers. Even though the gophers do not live there anymore. I got gophers on my property. I ain't got mounds. But anyway, I understand, but the mounds occur continent-wide. And once you start looking into this thing, these mounds are everywhere. Some are huge, some are small. The ones back east have been associated with Indian tribes, but the Indians all say, we didn't build those things. They were here when we got there. They find giant skeletons in association with the Mima Mound, with the Indian mounds, or whoever built them. And in some cases, one of the most famous ones is the Serpent Mound in Ohio, Adams County, southern Ohio. And they have had crop circles next to the Serpent Mound. They have found a giant skeleton next to the Serpent Mound, not in the Serpent Mound, but near it. And other indications that all of this paranormal stuff does indeed overlap. Let's see, what were some of the other subjects? Oh, the Great Pyramid. I was always told, well, that's a tomb. King Tut or one of those guys buried in there. If you start reading books on that thing, when they show you an inside, that thing is a power plant. The Egyptians probably did not build it, but, if the Egyptians built it, they built it under the direction of somebody more sophisticated than they. I refuse to believe that a bunch of Stone Age, maybe not Stone Age, but Bronze Age Egyptians did not build that themselves, nor could they move that kind of material without wheels, which they did not have. And then you get the same things. Ron was showing the ones in South America, same thing. Crazy huge stones that could not possibly be moved up that hill into Machu Picchu, and so on and so forth. So what it all points to me, just because I need to have some sort of conclusion about what it's all saying, and that is, I think the mounds indicate that there is subterranean excavation going on in a big, big way. On planet Earth. It has happened a long time ago, but there are beings comfortably ensconced in this planet. Or there is another possibility, and that is the Earth itself is alive and is generating some of these phenomena itself, or both. But I do believe that the mounds are there because these excavations happened, and even if they're using natural caves and improving upon them, you got to get rid of a bunch of stuff. And as much as they study these mounds continent-wide, nobody ever asks the next question. Where is the hole that should correspond to the mound? You can't find it. And some of these things are huge, especially the ones back east. And so to me, it suggests that these are tailings from underneath that they got to get rid of. And what they do is they put them in cute little shapes and things that look all ceremonial and Native American. It's all just to throw off the scientists and the rest of us who are, just not wondering about where did all this dirt come from. But I do think that that's what it points to. Meanwhile, I do think when it comes to the Sasquatch and the ETs and everything else, there's one key idea, and that is they are patiently waiting for us as a species to sort of wake up to a more sophisticated way of being. They're very, very patient. They're in no hurry to have this happen, and they're not going to help us. They're waiting for us to figure out. It's exactly like 2001: A Space Odyssey, when the astronauts finally touch the black monolith. If you've seen this movie, then it sends a message to the planet where they're living, and that was their indication that humanity's finally become sophisticated enough. So you see, our interest in the paranormal is the black monolith, so to speak, and when we touch it, then they're going to go, okay, finally you get it. You can now enter the galactic community, and you're sophisticated enough to be treated as, shall we say, grown-ups. And here we sit in Montana, which is not known as a hotbed for intellectual thinking. But, we're talking about this stuff. And I think that, to me, is a point of great encouragement. I think we're getting closer to touching the black monolith. And I really don't think it's going to happen before I die. But, I'm hoping I'm wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.